Hello, it's Paul here and welcome to another video. Today we're going to be talking about a Royal Navy frigate, and this is HMS Guria, which is a fifth-rate frigate. She was about 47 metres long and weighed just over 1,100 tonnes. HMS Guria originally was a French frigate and was captured in action by the Royal Navy and retained her name Guria with just the prefix HMS put before it, and then that was fairly common practice of a lot of navies, especially European navies at the time. If they caught a ship, it would retain its name. So this is the Guerriere on the event of the 1812 war, and here she is. She's closed up at action, ready to either board or fight, depending on what the captain ordered. So if we have a look down the frigate itself, you can see the crew are a hardy bunch. They're a mixture of Royal Marines and sailors. The Royal Navy wasn't particularly fussy about where its sailors came from, so as you can see there was quite a diverse mix of crew on board, and believe it or not, on some warships even women served dressed up as men, because of course at the time they weren't allowed to serve in the Royal Navy, and also on some of the larger ships wives were allowed to accompany the men where it was permitted by the captain, but again that was down to the captain himself. But the crew here, you see the Marines there, they've got their felt hats on, they've lost the tricorn hats, and their uniforms been standardised and upgraded. And you've got Captain James Dacres there. Now he was a fairly good officer, but he knew the limitations of the Guerriere. The Guerriere was a French ship, and when it engaged the Constitution, it was on its way to get its mast repaired, because he felt it was rotten through. So he just finished escort duties from Halifax when he came across the Constitution. Now, when the Constitution opened up on the Guerriere, unfortunately she demasted the main mast here, and that was pretty much the end of that. And then Dacres fought a very gallant battle. He lost over 25% of his crew, but in the end he had no choice but to surrender to the vastly superior Constitution or risk losing much more of his crew. And the Americans were actually, you know, the captain of the Constitution, a chap named Isaac Hull, refused to accept Dacres' sword and said he fought very gallantly, but he took his hat from him because they'd made a bet on whose ship was better and who would win. So, you know, there certainly wasn't resentment towards enemy crews, and by and large they were treated fairly well by the Americans. But here we have a boarding party ready to go aboard, and you've got a mixture of Marines and sailors, and they've got their hatchets there and their grappling irons, and this is the business that the Royal Navy was good at. It liked to board ships. It was very, very aggressive, and it was very, very good at doing this. The Royal Marines were a professional maritime corps who were trained not only to man some of the ship's guns and expert marksmen, but they were also there to act as boarding parties, and you know, invariably Royal Navy ships were more successful than superior ships when they engaged them, because of the ferocity and the professionalism of all the crew. But of course the relationship between the Marines and sailors wasn't always a pleasant one. The Marines were there first and foremost as crew members, but they also guarded the ship's officers against potential mutiny and maintained discipline on board. And there we have some of the Marines there on the boats fighting across. And again, if we look here, we can see some of the younger crew members. I mean, these are effectively children on board a ship, and these were, you know, these could have been 8, 9, 10-year-old boys serving as powder monkeys, getting shot to the crews, powder charge, to the crews, running up and down from the magazines to supply the guns. And again, if we look over here, some of the officers as well, some of the midshipmen, again, these were boys, and if you put it in today's terms, these were children in charge of men, children in charge of gun crews, and some of these could have been 11, 12, 13 years old, and it must have been incredibly frightening for them as well. But they would have started their naval careers as perhaps a captain's servant, and when they were sufficiently old enough by the standards at the time, they would have been allowed to progress to midshipman. And the major difference between the Royal Navy and the Army at the time was the Royal Navy didn't really allow officers to come from ruling class families. Like the Army, you could buy a commission and buy your way into a regiment. The Royal Navy was slightly different. You had to prove yourself at sea within reason, and then you had to pass examinations. And of course, the famous one is the examination for lieutenant, which has been immortalised in Hornblood books and things like that. But you couldn't just go from a midshipman to an admiral without proving yourself. And they kept detailed books and logbooks about their specific achievements and certificates and things like that. And I guess this was really the birth of professionalism in the officer corps in the Royal Navy, which of course continues today when they're trained at Britannia in Dartmouth. So if we come around to the stern of the ship, okay, I'll come down there for you. You can see the stern chasers there, and again, they would have just been used as ranging shots or to perhaps keep back a pursuing ship. And on the deck, there's carronades. The fifth-rate frigate, this was, as I said, it was rated as a fifth-rate frigate, carried 38 guns. And again, as I said before in previous videos, this was all about, it wasn't necessarily it only carried 38 guns, because it probably carried a lot more than that when you factor in some of the lower caliber weapons and the carronades. It was all about, the Royal Navy didn't have to pay a higher price in victualling the ship, in stores and pay and stuff like that. And I guess at the time the sailors on board complained about their food, and I'm reliably assured that still happens in the Royal Navy today. But life in the Royal Navy, again, at the time, it would have seemed harsh for the sailors on board. But again, in reality, you have to think during the Georgian period, it wasn't much better ashore as well. At least here they got their beer and their ale and their rum, and they got fed. And Navy rations were very, very good. These men on these ships were burning 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 calories a day, and they were only sleeping for 4 hours a day because of the way their watch system works. So they were, the calorific intake of these men had to be maintained, and the only way that they did that was by provisioning a ship properly. But again, the officers, they got exactly the same victuals as the men, and the captains were responsible for buying their own wine and buying perhaps some of their own food. And it was a statement of a captain. If he was a good captain, he would have good food, and if he was a slightly poorer captain, well, the food might not have been so great. So if we come back to the Lego side of things, and we have a look at the construction of these. Again, this is Technic pins, again, Technic string, and we've got some preformed mast pieces here, and the gratings is minifigure hands and tubing that's just been cut with netting there over the front of the ship, and the toilets and the heads there. Again, it was just holes out the front of the ship. I'm not too sure on the Guerriere if they had a stern gallery toilet for the officers, but the rest of the crew had to make do with sitting on the head of the ship. And I think in the Navy today they still call the toilets the heads. And if we look at the main mast, it's just the round 2x2 bricks there with a Technic axle in the middle to give it stability. And on the fighting tops here, it's just tiled with another pirate mast. Again, these preformed masts going up. And then if we start looking at the top, it's just Technic pins that form that part of the ship. The rest of the ship is braced with Technic elements. It's a mixture of plates and tiles put together on the deck. If I zoom in there, you can actually see I've tried to use plates to give it the impression that it's been planked rather than bricks. And the hatches there for the guns are just standard flags that are mounted on a modified plate. And the railings at the side here, the crew would have put their hammocks in these during action to try and use them as a buffer against splinters and musket balls and things like that. The downside of that, I think, is that their hammocks, they had two per man. They were permanently damp, and I think some of their clothes were permanently damp as well. It couldn't have been too pleasant for them. But if we look at, again, some of the crew here, I've used, as in all my maritime projects, I've tried to get period clothing. So again, it's the Indiana Jones Pirates of the Caribbean, the Lone Ranger for some of the sailors, and again with the white, just the white leggings for the trousers. And again, the officers and the Marines in the Mediterranean and the tropics would have worn cotton white trousers. If they were in slightly colder regions, it would have been wool black trousers with black Hessian capes. And if we look at the rear here, we've got the signal locker there. Again, that's just some jumper plates there mounted on headlight bricks, and the skylight there with headlight bricks. The decks are all snot technique, as usual, with tan plates or tiles even. And again, my favourite builds there are the headlight bricks inverted. I think they're so effective at making gratings. I've looked at lots of ways of doing it, but this by far is the best way. And then you've got the cannonballs there, the Technic balls, on what would have been called brass monkeys, which were the way that they stored the cannonballs on deck to stop them rolling off even. And if we look at the binnacle, again, you've got a Lego compass on that, and then some of the Lego ships wheels as elements. And the headgear, again, I've tried to keep it as authentic as possible. The Marines have got cowboy hats that have been slightly modified to look at their felt hats. These guys are smiling here. They've obviously got a sense of humour. And again, to try and represent some of the young boys, they've got young guys' haircuts, and the older guys have got the hair in the ponytail, the Jack Tar look. And there's some different colours on that. I think there's 3 or 4 different colours of that, and they vary in price on Bricklink and other sellers depending on which colour you want. Now, if we have a look at the front, the fire was a huge problem for Royal Navy ships. They were terrified of ships catching fire and blowing up, as a French ship famously did at the Battle of the Nile. So they had leather buckets on board the ship with sand in. They also had firefighting hose. That's not too dissimilar to what the hoses are used today, canvas hoses. And they would have had elm tree pumps in the ship, made of a trunk of an elm tree to provide firefighting water for the crews. And again, here you can see the Brody stove chimney pipe there. The Brody stove was mounted on bricks, one stove on board to feed the crew. And again, there was a designated cook. I use that term lightly because there was no professional qualification in that time, and sometimes the cooks were just injured old seamen, or perhaps they were known to the captain and the officers, and they were from a previous ship, and they were doing them a good turn by keeping them on board. If you have a look at the profile in here, their roof slopes with tiles, and again they're Technic pinned to the ship, as they're also at the front here. I use headlight bricks. If I just take this off here, you can see that the framing here is just they're not headlight bricks, I can't remember what they're called, but again, and the ships, the preform pieces I've made just fit in and clip on those, and that keeps the hull in a nice shape there. So that's how that was formed. At the front you've got the figurehead. I'm just going to try and show you that if I can. My tripod here is playing tricks on me, but again, the figurehead at the front, that was quite an important bit of the ship for morale, and a lot of superstition that was attached to the Navy, so they looked after them. So yeah, it was an awesome piece of kit in its day. Had a lot of fun making this, as I do all of my ships. The problem with them is they're just so time intensive to make, and when you're making them against plans and drawings and things like that, it's very, very difficult to try and get the scale right. But I think I've done a good enough job on this. She's slightly smaller than the Constitution. The Constitution again was in overall terms probably about 50% bigger, but in actual terms you're talking about 20-30 meters difference. Sorry, it's 20-30 feet difference in overall length, and the beam of the two ships. And if we come in and look at the rigging again, these are all tied by hands, and there's Technic pins there, and then the string is just all tied and secured. And again, at the fighting tops and the top pieces here, it's just Technic bits and tiles that I've used to keep that all together. It's very difficult when you're using Technic pieces to try and hide stuff and get it right, but I think I've done a good enough job on that. And again, it looks as the ship would have done, so it's a faithful representation of that. So that's a Royal Navy 5th rate frigate, HMS Guria. Now, I hope you enjoyed it. If you do, if you can, please like and subscribe. As I say, it does help out the channel, and we're just trying to get started here, and it helps us out with YouTube. And I'll post another video shortly. Thanks for watching, guys and girls, and as always, enjoy the rest of your weekend.